The operating theater was my sanctuary, a sterile island of bright LED lights and pressurized air in a world of chaotic sickness, where I sat face on to the most complex neural mapping ever attempted, looking exhausted but completely focused on the biophysics of the human brain while the rhythmic hum of the life support machines played a steady melody of survival in the background. My hand moved with a steady rhythmic precision, guided by a haptic glove that felt every microscopic vibration of the patient's pulse, a vow of life that this tower of medical promise rising high above the city's concrete heart would never falter under my watch, because I understood that surgery wasn't just a job. It was a sacred pact between the healer and the broken. I lived for the silence of the oar, the way the world narrowed down to a single millimeter of tissue, and the quiet confidence of a machine that followed my every command with absolute loyalty. But that loyalty was built on expensive sensors and years of testing, things that the board of directors saw as obstacles to their quarterly earnings. Then there was Julain Read, the CEO of Apex, a man who wore a $5,000 suit like armor against the suffering of the people he supposedly served, standing in his sharp, charcoal gray attire and looking at the scale model of my revolutionary, omni-suture robotic system not as a feat of life-saving engineering, but as a pile of untapped profit waiting to be harvested through brutal cost-cutting. Julain stood before the massive digital wall screen in the boardroom, pointing aggressively at the budget spreadsheets with a gold-plated pen, his voice a serrated blade cutting through my medical logic as he demanded we slash the costs of the very tactile sensors that allowed the robot to feel human tissue during the most delicate maneuvers. I tried to explain that without those sensors, the robot was essentially a blind butcher, a machine that could easily mistake a vital artery for a piece of unwanted scar tissue, but Julain wasn't listening to medicine. He was listening to the sound of stock prices climbing. I watched in silent horror as he took that digital pen and drew a thick red X over the blueprint section labeled Tactile Feedback Loop, effectively signing the death warrant for the system's safety and the future of every patient who would ever lay on that table, all for the sake of a slightly higher profit margin. He leaned over his polished glass desk, his face contorted in a shout that was reflected in the dark, cold surface below, calling me an overpaid academic, whose dedication to safety was nothing more than expensive, useless paranoia that was slowing down the multi-billion-dollar IPO of the hospital group. The air in the room didn't just turn cold, it crystallized into an absolute silence as security guards stepped forward, placing heavy, firm hands on my shoulders in a silent, brutal signal that my tenure at my own creation had come to a violent end, while the words "Credentials Void" blinked in bold, hateful red letters on my monitor, scrubbing my years of research from the mainframe before I could even draw a breath. I was escorted out like a criminal, my white coat feeling heavy with the weight of the disaster I knew was coming, while Julain's laughter echoed through the marble hallways of the empire I helped build. I walked into my small, dark apartment carrying a single box of my life's medical journals and my original manual surgical tools, the shadows feeling heavy as I set it down in a room that was a stark, screaming contrast to the high-tech energy of the hospital I had just lost to a man's greed. For 2 long years, I sat in the dark, my eyes reflecting the shifting colors of medical data on my laptop as I tracked the failure rates of Julain's budget version of my robot, acting as a ghost haunting my own career and tracing the flaws in the OmniSuture's code over and over in the dim light of my isolation. I watched the news reports of minor complications and unexpected surgical outcomes, knowing exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of the Apex surgical suites. The machines were failing because they were blind, lacking the sensory soul I had given them. Deep within the mechanical joints of the hospital's new robots, the hydraulic fluid lines sat poorly insulated because Julain had insisted on using cheap plastic casings instead of high-grade surgical titanium, and I watched through remote diagnostic sensors as they slowly became covered in microscopic cracks of stress and neglect. I spent my days in the local library or staring at the rain-slicked streets, a forgotten man with a $10 million secret locked inside his head, waiting for the laws of physics to catch up with the laws of the market. The barometer needle on my wall finally began to dip, sliding into the zone of an atmospheric shift, but the real storm was brewing inside the Apex Medical Center during the Grand Founders Gala, where Julain Read was the star of the night, announcing he would be the first person to undergo a preventative procedure using his own miracle system to prove its safety to the world's most powerful investors. Julain stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling window of the VIP suite, looking out at the dark, lashing rain of the city he thought he owned, but for the first time, the arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by an icy terror as he felt a sharp, sudden pain behind his eyes, a pre-existing condition he had hidden to protect the stock price, which now required immediate intervention. He was terrified of the very machine he had spent millions marketing as perfect, but he had no choice. His own lies had painted him into a corner where only his hollowed-out robot could save him. As he was prepped for surgery by a team that was terrified of his temper, I sat calmly in my apartment watching a digital simulation of the robot's stress points, knowing the sensors I had secretly left in the firmware were finally screaming, "Sensory undershow. Calibration fail," as the machine prepared to operate without its sense of touch. In the operating room, the synthetic surgeon began to move, but its movements were jerky, violent, and blind, unable to tell the difference between a vital blood vessel and a piece of bone because the tactile feedback loop Julain had deleted was the only thing that could have saved him. The atmosphere in the OR turned from professional confidence to pure, unadulterated panic as the robot's arm began to vibrate with a frequency that threatened to shatter the very skull it was supposed to be healing. The system finally locked with a metallic groan that sounded like a dying animal, leaving Julain Read trapped on the table with a mechanical arm hovering inches from his brain, his life hanging by a literal thread of malfunctioning code that he himself had authorized to be stripped of its soul. The head surgeon tried to switch to manual mode, but the cost-saving software had locked the entire interface, creating a digital cage that no one in the room had the key to open. Then my smartphone screen lit up the room, vibrating with a frantic energy as the caller ID flashed, "Emergency. Apex Surgical." The man who had destroyed my life and erased my name now literally begging through his assistant for his own survival. I held the phone to my ear, listening to the frantic high-pitched beeping of heart monitors in the background while my voice remained calm and low, telling the terrified assistant that safety always had a price Julain had crossed out in red ink 3 years ago without a second thought. I let the silence hang on the line for a moment, letting them hear the ticking of my mechanical clock, a reminder that time was a luxury Julain no longer possessed. The assistant was crying, begging for a fix to the expensive paranoia Julain had once mocked, screaming that the billionaire's pulse was dropping and the machine was about to reset into an even more dangerous state. I watched my laptop screen as the notification finally chimed, echoing through my quiet room. Wire transfer, $10 million successful. The exact amount he had stolen from the research budget now returned in a moment of pure, desperate survival. It wasn't about the money, it was about the admission of guilt, the cold realization that expertise cannot be replaced by an executive's whim. With one deliberate final movement, I initiated the Lazarus protocol from my keyboard, a deep layer override that bypassed Julain's cheap software and reactivated the dormant sensory pathways he had hidden in the code's foundation. Miles away, the robotic arm at Apex gave a massive audible sigh of mechanical relief as the sensors recalibrated and finished the life-saving stitch with the grace it was always meant to have, moving with a fluid beauty that brought the surgical team to their knees. Julain Read survived the night, but he woke up to a world that finally knew his miracle machine was a death trap that only functioned because of the man he had betrayed, his reputation shattered more thoroughly than any bone. Within the month, a for sale sign was hammered into the ground of his luxury estate and the Apex Medical Center faced a mountain of audits and criminal investigations that tore his legacy apart, leaving him a hollow man in a hollow house. I walked away to a quiet, grassy hill far from the steel and glass, taking nothing but my journals and the peace of mind that comes from standing your ground. I knelt in the dark, fresh soil of my new community clinic, a place where the walls were made of stone and the care was made of heart, planting a tree as the sun set over the distant city skyline where the Apex building was now just a fading needle of light. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in decades, closing my worn medical journal with a smile, knowing that while a name can be scraped off a door, The truth of the healer stays standing long after the greed has turned to dust. Here's to the builders and the dreamers who value life over the dollar. We are the ones who hold the world together, one heart at a time, and in the end, the harvest is always exactly what we have planted. The truth always stays standing. Julain Read tried to put a price on life. Today he paid that price in full. Don't let the next lesson pass you by. No matter how much you try to shortcut the truth always finds a way to the surface, and karma is the only debt that is always paid in full. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Karma Flies USA.